Last year, we took you on a journey through the year 1971 by looking at its amazing music. Now, at the beginning of a new year, why not do it again? This is a look back to 50 years ago through its music, to the year 1972, next on If Guitars Could Speak. 1972 would begin with a new UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim, who would later be found to have been an intelligence officer in the Nazi Wehrmacht. Not a great start. On January 5th, President Nixon would order the beginning of NASA's space shuttle program. Queen Margrethe II of Denmark became the first female monarch of that country since 1412. On the 24th, Japanese soldier Shoichi Yokoi is discovered in Guam after spending 28 years in the jungle in hiding, having failed to surrender World War II. On January 30th, Bloody Sunday occurs in Derry, Northern Ireland, when 14 unarmed nationalist protesters, mostly young teens, are killed by British Army soldiers. In February, the 1972 Winter Olympics are held in Sapporo, Japan. The Volkswagen Beetle exceeds the sales of the Ford Model T when the 15,007,034th Beetle is sold. On the 21st, only Nixon could go to China. On March 15th, The Godfather has its premiere in Loew's State Theater in New York. On April 16, Apollo 16 would fly to the moon, unveiling the famous lunar rover because only Americans would go to another heavenly body and have to drive on it. On May 24th, the Magnavox Odyssey is demoed for the first time, making it the first commercial home video game console. On June 17th, 5 White House operatives are arrested for their burglary at the Watergate Hotel, and that same day the United States officially returned Okinawa to Japan, which had been under U.S. occupation after the end of World War II in 1945. On July 11th, Russian Boris Spassky and American Bobby Fischer began their long-awaited chess match in Reykjavik. On August 19th, the first daytime episode of the still-running American game show The Price is Right is filmed at CBS Television City. And on the 26th, the 1972 Summer Olympics start in Munich, West Germany. Then, on September 5th and 6th, the Olympic Games would be marred by the murders of 11 Israeli athletes by the Palestinian terrorist group Black September. On November 29, Atari releases the seminal game Pong, and on December 19th, Apollo 17 returns to Earth, effectively ending the Apollo program after 6 successful missions. And finally, on December 31st, talented baseball player Roberto Clemente would be killed in a plane crash off Puerto Rico. Clemente was en route to aid the survivors of an earthquake in Nicaragua. And now let's look at 1972, 50 years ago, through the albums that were released. Much like 1971, January would see a number of debut albums released by many acts that would go on to stardom. On January 16th, Blue Oyster Cult would release its first album featuring Cities on Flame with Rock and Roll. On the 20th, the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia would release his first solo effort, simply titled Garcia. And a young Michael Jackson would put out his first solo effort in Got to Be There, which would include the now ubiquitous Rockin' Robin. Jackson Browne also put out his self-titled debut this month, featuring the number 8 hit Dr. My Eyes. Other releases from January include the third album from Linda Ronstadt, which was a sales failure on the way to her breakout in 1974, and Al Green's soul classic Let's Stay Together. But the big release from January had to be the second solo effort from one of America's treasures of songwriting, Paul Simon. Simon's first solo effort, recorded in England in 1965, was unreleased in the US until '69, and 1972's Paul Simon would effectively be Simon's first solo album after his break with singing partner Art Garfunkel. Featuring hits like Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard and Mother and Child Reunion, it signaled that Simon wasn't going anywhere, and it began a 70s run of success for Simon as the godfather of the singer-songwriter era. 1972's second month saw a mixed bag of releases from an eclectic mix of artists. The Allman Brothers would follow up 71's Fillmore East album with a massive double album, Eat a Peach. The King, Elvis Presley, would release his 16th album, Elvis Now, and the Partridge Family's David Cassidy would put out his first solo effort in Cherish. Jorma Kaukonen's folk rock outfit Hot Tuna would release their third album, Burgers. Former British blues bandleader Manfred Mann would show off his fourth new project, a half step toward the prog rock world, with the debut album from Manfred Mann's Earth Band on the 18th. But the marquee release from February was unquestionably Neil Young's fourth solo album, Harvest, which was just an inspired piece of songwriting featuring such iconic tracks as Old Man, Heart of Gold, A Man Needs a Maid, and The Needle and the Damage Done. The album was also backed by a gaggle of amazing talent, including all of Young's CSNY bandmates, James Taylor and Linda Ronstadt. March had some seriously titanic releases. Jethro Tull would release their parody of the overinflated concept album genre with Thick as a Brick, with the band claiming that it had been written by an 8-year-old genius named Gerald Bostock, but it was actually written by frontman Ian Anderson. Stevie Wonder released his 14th album, Music of My Mind, which would begin a run of music that cemented Wonder as a musical genius. Thin Lizzy put out their second album, Shades of a Blue Orphanage, which was a mashup of the members' previous bands Shades of Blue and Orphanage. Harry Chapin would put out his smash hit album Heads and Tails, which featured Chapin's first hit, Taxi. Fleetwood Mac put out Bare Trees, which would be their last, with guitarist Danny Kirwan. We saw the debut album by former If Guitars Could Speak subject Bobby Whitlock, which was essentially a second Derek and the Dominoes album since they all played on it. Humble Pie, once featuring the twin guitar gods Peter Frampton and Steve Marriott, released their breakthrough album Smokin', without Frampton, who'd left after the prior year's Rock On album for a solo career. We also saw a debut from the future 70s arena rock gods Styx. But the big one from March has to be the proto-metal classic Machine Head from Deep Purple, featuring classic rock staples like Space Truckin', Highway Star, and of course, Smoke on the Water. Recorded in Montreux, Switzerland, on the Rolling Stones mobile studio, the album would completely cement the formula for so many early metal bands. Dark, mysterious, virtuoso guitarist? Check. High-pitched, powerful lead singer? Check. But for my money, the X factor of Purple was their keyboard player, John Lord, who kind of set them apart in the genre, almost giving the band a prog rock sound at times. April was a little bit of a slower month, but wasn't without a number of notable releases. ZZ Top would kick it off with their second album, Rio Grande Mud, which followed their debut album from last year into mostly obscurity, with their breakthrough coming in 1973 with Tres Hombres. Graham Nash and David Crosby would release the first in a long line of collaboration albums. The Raspberries would release their first album containing their one-hit Go All the Way, featuring the quintessential 70s guitar riff and melodic vocal lines. Lou Reed, formerly of the Velvet Underground, would release his first self-titled solo album, and late 60s powerhouse Creedence Clearwater Revival would release their last album in Mardi Gras. We also saw former Free guitarist Paul Kossoff team up with future Bad Company drummer Simon Kirke and bassist Tetsu Yamauchi and John Rabbit Bundrick to release their only album. But the most notable release, in my opinion, is the third album from my fellow South Philadelphian, singer-songwriter Jim Croce, with You Don't Mess Around with Jim. It would become Jim's breakout album, also featuring Operator and Time in a Bottle. A true unsung member of the crowded 70s singer-songwriter genre. If it's been a while since you've listened to Jim Croce's stuff, I urge you to rediscover him. May would start off with the final release of the Jeff Beck Group, their fourth self-titled album. Beck would move on to the Beck, Bogert, and a Peach project the next year. We also saw the fourth album by the notoriously hard-to-categorize Uriah Heep with Demons and Wizards. Rory Gallagher released a great live album, Live in Europe, and jazz fusion band Weather Report put out their second effort with I Sing the Body Electric. Elton John would kick off a string of number one albums in the US with his fifth album, Honky Chateau, which featured the hits Honky Cat and Rocket Man. But the big one from May is the masterpiece from the Rolling Stones, the 67-minute long Exile on Main Street, recorded in France as the Stones had fled the UK as tax exiles after mismanagement from Alan Klein and high tax rates. The album features a raucous collection of jam-heavy songs that center around the genius riff-making of Keith Richards and the always lively vocals of Mick Jagger. Although I consider the previous year's Sticky Fingers to be the Stones' best album, most rock historians place this album at the top of the heap for the London Blues outfit. Let's keep right on rocking into the summer of 72 with the month of June kicking off with a debut album by the Eagles, which was formed by music impresario David Geffen and honed to studio perfection by Glyn Johns, who'd initially turned down the production duties, calling the band confused. Eventually, the Eagles would become the biggest band of the 70s, but this first album started it all off with 3 hit singles, Peaceful Easy Feeling, Witchy Woman, and the Jackson Browne penned Take It Easy. We also saw the debut by Looking Glass and their ubiquitous 70s classic Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, written by lead singer Elliot Lurie. Alice Cooper's 5th album would become the clarion call of students everywhere with their huge hit School's Out. John Lennon and Yoko Ono would release Sometime in New York City, which was best known for its controversial lead track, Woman is the N-Word of the World. Brian Ferry's glam rock outfit Roxy Music would put out its debut on the 16th. But June's biggest album came from the explosive partnership of David Bowie and our first forgotten fretmaster Mick Ronson when they dropped Bowie's 5th album, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars on us. The unquestioned king of the glam rock era, Ziggy literally has too many great songs to list here, but I just want to point out that it is Ronson who is the unsung hero here, playing piano, classical instruments to lend a musical and varied sound to the album, in addition to one of the most historically aggressive guitar tones to ever be put to tape. Ziggy Stardust is one of my top 5 Desert Island albums. What a record. The Dog Days of Summer would kick off with the second release from the Doobie Brothers in Toulouse Street, which spawned their first big hit in Listen to the Music. Frank Zappa would follow a message on a Ouija board to his 4th solo effort, Waka Jawaka. Harry Nilsson followed up his smash 71 Nilsson Schmilsson album with an eccentric work that featured musicians like George and Ringo, Peter Frampton, Klaus Voormann, Nicky Hopkins, and Bobby Keys helping out. The Doors would soldier on with their second post-Morrison release in Full Circle. It would be the last official album released by the band. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's 3rd album, aptly titled Trilogy, spawned their smash hit From the Beginning. But the big release from July is an unexpected one. The soundtrack from Jimmy Cliff's The Harder They Come would introduce the world to a new genre called reggae, and in addition to the smash hit title track, the soundtrack featured singles that had been released in Jamaica between 1967 and 1972, featuring artists like Toots and the Maytals, the Melodians, and Desmond Dekker. The Harder They Come would usher in a revolution and a call for more reggae, paving the way for artists like Bob Marley. It seems like the record releases kind of slowed down this month, so much so that there's not really one that stands out, but a few in the pop rock world worth noting include the late summer hit Summer Breeze by Seals and Crofts, the OJs with their hit Backstabbers and the album of the same name, and Michael Jackson's second album with Ben and its strange lead single about a cinematic killer rat. August also saw the Kinks release their 11th album, Everybody's in Showbiz, and the great single Celluloid Heroes. Always loved that song. We would also see guitar hero Roy Buchanan put out his second solo effort, A Self-Titled Affair. In September, we'd see releases from Grand Funk Railroad with Phoenix, and Cat Stevens with his 6th album, Catch Bull at 4. Yes's 5th album, Close to the Edge, would be the band's biggest commercial release to date, despite featuring longer progressive-styled songs. John Denver's 6th album would spawn his most well-known hit, Rocky Mountain High. The most bizarre release of the month, maybe the year, goes to the Osmonds, who put out their fourth album, Crazy Horses. Featuring a blistering hard rock sound, the album was a far departure from their prior vocal-centered work and even inspired some groups to pump up the volume. But the month's big release would go to Black Sabbath with their fourth album, Volume 4. While Volume 4 wouldn't spawn as many well-known hits as their prior three albums, the heaviness that permeated the album would continue to birth heavy metal and build on the sound that would come to define the genre. The fall season would bring in an interesting mix of releases with no real big one to tie it together. Genesis would release my favorite of the Gabriel era with Foxtrot, featuring the 26-minute-long epic Supper's Ready. Stevie Wonder would continue his experimentation on his 15th album, Talking Book. Keyboardist Billy Preston put out his 7th album, Music Is My Life, featuring the hit single Will It Go Round in Circles. Santana took a marked turn into jazz progressions with their 4th album, Caravanserai. Joe Walsh would unveil his new band on the album Barnstorm, temporarily trading his electric guitars for acoustics, having been inspired by the singer-songwriter revolution. And speaking of such, 12-string master Tim Buckley would release his 7th album, Greetings from L.A. The Alvin Lee fronted 10 years after had their 11th album, Rock and Roll Music to the World, and we saw the debut album by future 70s star Jerry Rafferty's band Stealers Wheel and their smash hit Stuck in the Middle with You. We would also see Pete Townshend step out on his own for the first time with his solo debut, Who Came First. In November, we got the debut from one of my favorite bands, Steely Dan, with Can't Buy a Thrill. The band was still finding its footing with keyboardist Donald Fagen ceding some lead vocal work to singer David Palmer, most notably on Dirty Work. But it was clear with the hits Reelin' in the Years and Do It Again that Fagen's sarcastic tone was the future of the band's sound. The Moody Blues released their 8th album, Seventh Sojourn. Should have saved that name for the last one, gents. Anyway, we would also get a second album from America with Homecoming featuring the hit Ventura Highway, and a third album from hard rock band Slade. But the big release from November was the amazing Transformer by Lou Reed, produced by David Bowie and Mick Ronson, and featuring Ronson again as a master arranger and multi-instrumentalist. Transformer's timeless hit Walk on the Wild Side cut open the soft underbelly of the New York club scene and introduced an unsuspecting public to a world that many couldn't have imagined. The album's tone would set a standard for the 70s, with the club scene exploding into the mainstream later in the decade, especially around sites like Studio 54. Well, I wish I could say that December went out with a bang, but barely any albums were released this month. We would get a 4th album from British prog rockers Gentle Giant with Octopus. Status Quo put out their 5th album, Pile Driver, and the Gary Rickrath-led REO Speedwagon would put out their 2nd album, TWO. We also got a killer live album from Deep Purple called Made in Japan. Marvin Gaye would follow up 1971's What's Going On with the soundtrack album for the blaxploitation film Trouble Man on the Tamla Records label. Well, as you can see, in my opinion, 1972 wasn't quite the powerhouse that 1971 was, but there were still some amazing releases in this great year. If you haven't subscribed to the Guitar Historian channel, what are you waiting for? And make sure you like the video to let YouTube know that you think other music fans would enjoy this walk down memory lane. With that, I'll just say thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.